All right, my name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Judy Nedry at her home in Lake Oswego.
Hi.
April 19th, 2021. Judy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yes, indeed.
We're going to start with wine today, so let's talk about why wine.
Why wine? Wow. Because I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and wine was part of communion, and it had an incredible fascination for me from when I was a kid on. And then of course, being a reader, I started reading when I was really young, and when I got into real novels, there was always wine. So, yeah, everything about it was intriguing to me from a very early age.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the process of kind of discovering it as you grew up.
Well, the first probably, I've always liked to try local products, and I was drinking these $1 a bottle Chiantis, and I'd get a bottle a week when I was a senior in college and think I was a big deal, and so I drank that rot gut for a while, and then real Chianti is a thing of beauty, but this was not, but it did the job. And somewhere after I moved to Portland, I discovered that there were some Oregon wines, and the first Oregon wine I remember drinking was Ma Bender's Rosy Rhubarb, which was, how shall I say this, an otherworldly experience. And it was really good. It was really good. I mean, who knew, Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the favorite wine of the early 70s until I started working downtown Portland, and people I was around were interested in wine, and we started a wine tasting group. And that really started opening doors for me, and it kind of went from there. I met Harry at a bus stop. That's Harry Peterson Nedry, and he was interested in wine. So when we started dating, we really started trying nice wines,
Mm-hmm.
And he was from North Carolina and hadn't really had any experience with wine. But out here, when we got together, it grew.
Mm-hmm.
And he was from a farm, and he really wanted to farm. And I was a writer, and I really wanted to write. And after we got married, and I quit working to stay home with little kids, and I was writing about art, and that wasn't going anywhere. There were apparently a lot of people who knew more about art than I did, or thought they did, and so I wasn't selling anything there, and our wine interest continued, and we started going to the local places, and I decided I would write something about Oregon wines because I was passionate about it. You couldn't read anything about Oregon wines in 1980. So here I was, 7 months pregnant with Wynn, my winemaker baby, and she's bouncing around in there, and I set up all these interviews with the pioneer winemakers, and Myron Redford, Dick Erath. Actually, I spoke to Kina. So the Eraths, the Campbells, the Volstecks, David Lett, and Dave Adelsheim, and the Ponzis. So, the classic, and the Sokolblassers. And I wrote my first Oregon wine article for the Oregon Business Journal. I turned it in on May 1st, and my winemaker daughter was born the next day. So she's been soaked in this stuff. And then I approached a wine. I went over to Idaho to visit my parents that summer, and we went out to St. Chapelle, which turns out was making really good Rieslings. And I thought, okay, I can write about these guys. And that was the first wine article I sold to a wine magazine. And then I kind of got hooked on it. I was on the march, and there was something I could do. There was a market for it, and I loved it. And I'll tell you what, my first interview with David Lett was one of the scariest things I ever went through. He approached me like Winston Churchill before Dunkirk. And do you know this, and do you know that? And he was really aggressive. And he turned out to be such a puppy dog, and we were such good friends for years and years and years. And you know, I really forged some friendships there, and yeah, it was amazing. And he was my best source. I'd go over there if I needed to know something. I'd go over there, and we'd get together in his office, in that dingy old office. Have you seen? You saw it. Yeah. That's an archive in itself. And we get together in that dingy old office and have a couple glasses of his wonderful wine. And boy, did I get stories from him. So that was extra enrichment. But, you know, before very long, I mean, maybe a year or so later, I was writing for the Wine Spectator and a couple other wine magazines. And then I started judging, and a guy I met named Craig Goldwyn started a magazine and wanted me to be his regional editor. And so I had several freelance gigs going, and it was just this wonderful network that kept building and building. And by the time we moved to Newburgh in 1986, I had the network in place to break the story about Rollin, Sauls, and Argyll, and when that whole thing came out, I broke that in the Wine Spectator. And then I knew something was going on with the French, and Adelsheim and Lett weren't going to tell me anything. So I just got very pugnacious about it, and I went after Lett, and I finally wrung it out of him, and I broke the Druon story to the Wine Spectator and anyone else who was interested. So I really got in on all the juicy stuff. And aside from that, there was back then there weren't that many wineries. I mean, the explosion probably started after Argyll and Druon, but you know, it was a small community, and I think when I wrote my first story, there were maybe 16 or 18 wineries in Oregon. Considerably more when I did my first wine judging at the Oregon State Fair. I think that might have been 84. And they attracted a couple of big name judges. That's where I met Craig Goldwyn. And kind of went from there. Yeah, but the thing that was fun, there were a lot of get-togethers, and many of them were very spontaneous, and they were up at Adelsheim's house that overlooked their vineyard. And we'd just get up there, we'd go up there, and everybody'd bring stuff. And I'll tell you, the food and wine and stories that flowed at those events was absolutely magical. The kids grew up with it. And I forgot to mention, in 1980, you know, Harry the farmer found some vineyard land. So the year Wynn was born, we bought our first property. And at some point, I knew I'd have to get out of the wine writing because there'd be a winery, but that was still a long way off. And so he kind of took over the vineyard management. I got involved when I could, and when he started making wine in our garage, I was always cooking these big dinners for whoever happened to be working that day, and it was just so it was such a great connecting time. This big family of people in the industry. I can't even imagine what it's like now, because you know, it's gotten to be, there was a phase where a lot of wealthy people were coming in and starting wineries, and then now it's sort of gone into the corporate phase. And I don't know, and there are so many wineries, and I don't know that, I mean, I think, you know, were circumstances different and I was still writing about that stuff, I'd still find it interesting. But it's so different, and I reflect that in my novels, how my protagonist talks about how things are changing. And of course Oregon's making spectacular wines, and I believed that from the beginning, that was going to happen. I believed that from day one, when I was out there interviewing all those pioneers, and they believed it in their heart of hearts, and they proved themselves. It was really a spectacular experience, and I don't think too many people can tell a story like mine. You know, maybe some people in the early days of the Napa Valley boom, I knew some writers down there that were around when that was going on, and Leon Adams, he was at that first wine judging at the Oregon State Fair, and I took him, I spent a day with him driving all over wine country, and we talked so much about the early days of the Napa Valley wine auction and how he got out of regular reporting and into writing about wine. So anyway, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
So I have a lot of questions about that, but I want to back up for a second.
Sure.
You mentioned writing before wine. Tell me about your writing path before you started writing wine articles. What was your schooling and your kind of early writing work?
Well, in the fourth grade, I started writing a recipe book. So I've always had, aside from my kind of spiritual interest in wine in the early days, I had this thing about food, and I grew up in northern Idaho. And there wasn't much variety there, but I was always looking for that, and food and wine go together. And then in 6th grade, I was writing plays with a friend of mine, and started out as an English major, and then switched into journalism. Went from Whitman College to University of Oregon because they had a really good journalism school and still do. And then I fiddled around down in Eugene with a kind of a quasi-underground magazine called Bullfrog Information Service. And that experience deserves a book at some point. It was pretty bizarre, but I wouldn't have missed it. And then I moved up here and went to work as a reporter for the Tiger Times. So I always wanted to write, you know, what I wanted to write. And the fact that I got a chance to do that is just a gift. Yeah. Because I did it for, oh my God, 20 years. Yeah.
So you talked about, you had interesting perspective, like you said, kind of unique to you because you had the kind of the insider from watching Chehalem get started, but also from watching the industry from your role as writing about all of them. So tell me about your thoughts on, you mentioned kind of the people already, but your thoughts on the people and the wines of the 80s. You thought there was potential.
Yeah.
Tell me about the wines as you started tasting them and as you started judging them and the people behind them, and what made you think about the potential Oregon had.
Well, you know, when I worked at Merrill Lynch, and was in this tasting group, and then when I finished up there, we had a tasting group at home, and so it was tasting and comparison, I guess, and early on, I'm trying to remember. I think the wine Harry and I were most taken with was, we used to go to this little restaurant, kind of a bistro, and Adelsheim wines were on the wine list, and we always ordered them. And they were surprisingly good. I mean, this was late 70s. Yeah, I think 78, 79, 80. And they were making, I believe, a Merlot and a Semillon. My memory could be wrong, but we'd order those regularly when we went to this restaurant, and they were good. I don't know how they knew what they were doing. I don't. I mean, they were just like, here are these people. They'd been in the food. I think Ginny worked at Crepe Fair for some time, and Dave was working at a restaurant downtown, and we were just starting to get a couple good restaurants in Portland. And then they had this kind of communal thing going on out at their place very early on. But, you can't make good wine without good grapes. And so somewhere good grapes were being grown. And then Richard Sommer, at some point I tasted one of his Rieslings, and you don't have to be a genius to know that that was the real deal. Yeah. Richard Sommer could be erratic, but he made some incredible wines. And I trusted my palate. I'd always gone for the good stuff. All my life I'd been looking for the good stuff, and I was finding it. And so I knew that people who weren't supporting, weren't trying these wines were missing out, because here we were and here was this beautiful climate that was just perfect for certain types of grapes. And then Southern Oregon, a whole nother climate perfect for certain kinds of grapes. And then, oh my God, Walla Walla, Washington, where I went to college for 2 years. We have it all here. And that Riesling they were growing in Idaho was pretty amazing too. Here was this guy that shouldn't have been making great wine, making really good Riesling. And he was passionate about it. And those were great stories to me. And I was so excited. I just wanted to share them. Yeah. But I trusted my palate, and we'd throw these things in our little tasting groups at home, and when there were some wines available, and they did just fine. Of course, there were a lot of stinkers too back then, because people were just learning. But when you got a good one, it was pretty wonderful, and the learning curve also was incredibly fast. Oh, Elk Cove Rieslings. I just found one in I was doing an estate. I just found one in my late friend's basement that dated from 1982, and I gave it to my daughter, and I said, if this is still sound, you're going to be amazed, because they did beautiful Rieslings. Beautiful wines in general, but their Rieslings were exceptional.
So as you started to write more about wine in Oregon, what were the things you were attracted to? What did you enjoy writing about? And are there some memorable stories that you remember writing that you're particularly proud of or think back on?
Well, let me think a minute. Well, I was particularly proud of that first one on Idaho Riesling, because I think Miss Piggy on some Muppets show had said something about Idaho Riesling, and I thought, I'll show you, lady, and I have that story somewhere. And so I was pretty jazzed about that. And of course, the first one, the Oregon Business Journal, that just sort of laid it all out. This is what's here, and here's, so stand by for further news. David Lett had just won that big French tasting, which is where he and Drouin actually got to be friends. They were they were kind of professional rivals, but you know, that caught. Because both of those men were passionate about what they were doing, and Drouhin saw there was potential here. And you're not exactly going out and buying vineyard land in France, and haven't for quite a long time. So the only place to go was New World somewhere, if he wanted to expand. So, and I was really proud of the Drouhin story because it took such a lot of I don't know, planning and guile, and you know, I knew what was going on, but I couldn't prove it, and I couldn't say anything till I actually got it. And then when I finally squeezed it out of Lett, I called up Dave Adelsheim and I said, "Okay, it's time for us to talk." And then I think a week later, Drouhin was over here, and I got to talk to him, and I mean, it was fabulous. Yeah, he came over and signed the papers and got going. And then not too long after that, one Sunday morning, Doug Macy and Ernie Munch showed up at our house in Newburgh, and Doug was an old friend, and Ernie had been the architect we'd hired when we bought this old Queen Anne Victorian in Newburgh, and it needed a complete redo. And they came out and they wanted to know, well, what do we need to know about designing a winery? You know, and we're standing in the kitchen drinking coffee, and Harry and I gave them the goods, and they made a presentation, and they built the main Drouhin. And you know, they made it, I think it might have been, it was the first gravity flow winery, and the design is beautiful and withstands the tests of time. And you know, that was the kind of stuff that was happening in our lives, and that was part of the magic.
What do you remember of the reaction by the industry and to the Drouhins buying in? What do you remember, any reaction to your story?
Well, you know, I think surprise and delight. Surprise. A lot of people, like a lot of the tight little enclave, had been involved, you know, and then I kind of wormed my way into what was going on there. But surprise and delight, because we thought it would shine a light on how good things were here, and the amazing potential. Yeah. And I'm kind of foggy on dates, but that had to be 88.
88, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so yeah, we were still very young, and this was such a huge deal for the industry. Yeah. And it was, you know, the French. I love the French winemaking thing. It's so family oriented. So it was just the kind of thing our industry here understood, and they understood. And so it was the perfect fit. And it's proven to be a wonderful thing for the industry. Yeah, I think it attracts. That's when, I think that's when the outside investors started. You know, the second wave really started taking an interest as after that happened, for good or for bad, and I think mostly for good. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm curious, in the early days of your writing, there, as you mentioned, there wasn't much of an industry yet. There were only a couple of dozen wineries, perhaps, pretty scattered throughout the state, and there wasn't any kind of wasn't much interest, I assume, outside of Oregon in Oregon wine at that point yet. Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
No, there wasn't. But funny thing, I have through St. Chapelle, they did a little getaway on the Salmon River in 1984, and I met Lila Galt from Seattle. And she and her husband were starting a cider works on Bainbridge Island, which she called Brain Dead Island. She absolutely hated Bainbridge Island, but they were excited about the cider works. And Lila was also a writer, and she's a good friend. We became really good friends, but she became involved as an executive director for the Washington wine industry, and then I started, little planes would come down and fly me out to Yakima or up to Chateau Ste. Michelle for an event. And you know, once I kind of got my feet on the ground as a writer, it became bigger for me, much bigger than Oregon. It was Northwest. And then in 1986, the year we moved to Newburgh, another acquaintance of mine who'd been writing a wine newsletter approached me and wanted to expand this newsletter, and would I partner with him? And that was Cameron Nagel. And we did this little wine newsletter, and then we decided to turn it into a magazine a year later, and that became the Northwest Palate. So we could do the food and the wine. And that opened a lot of doors. And I started getting trips to Europe, and that was really fun. I'd been writing about European wines too, and a lot of California stuff. I mean, I went down to California a lot and wrote about, I was doing a wine column for This Week magazine, weekly column, and so I got a lot of, I did a lot more than just Oregon, but my focus and my passion was the Northwest wine industry, yeah.
Tell me about what you, as a writer, writing about an industry that is just getting going and doesn't have a lot of recognition yet. How did you approach it in terms of educating people who might be reading about Oregon wine without knowing anything about it?
I started with the stories and the families and the grit, you know, the hardships, what they went through. How nobody believed in them, and then they'd go win some big award somewhere. And I always think it's the story stupid, you know. And I was never going to run out of stories. There was always something new going on. And when we moved out to Newburgh, of course that was partly for the vineyard, but it put me, I didn't have to drop everything and figure out how I was going to get out there to cover something, you know. It was, because I was kind of right there. Yeah.
It's a question I like to ask about people who write about wine for a living. What is it about the wine industry and who it attracts to work in it that make for such compelling stories? What in your experience, what is compelling about people in the industry?
Family-oriented, agrarian, sustainable, natural. I'm not trying to use buzzwords here, but you know, I think the wine industry has kind of been shining a light for years on how to manage and sustain the land. And I think that's super important. Just for example, Harry has been keeping a temperature. He's really nerdy. He's been keeping track of temperatures since we bought the property out there in 1980, and seen an amazing difference in how things are heating up, and how we're terribly threatened by climate change. I mean, the whole industry can be, it's going to be Pinot Noir, they're going to be growing Pinot Noir. Well, they're already growing it in BC, but you know, Pinot Noir is a kind of a cooler climate grape, and this was a cooler climate 20 some years ago, 30 years ago, and harvest would start in mid-October. Well, when was the last time harvest started in mid-October? The last time it did, it was a fluke. So things are changing, but I liked the values. I liked the wine too. I liked the wine too much, but the values, the inherent values of what the industry was doing and how they were doing it was really attractive to me. And I liked the people. I didn't find that many pills. You know how every 4 out of 100 people are going to make you crazy. Well, I'd say maybe 2 in the industry. There were some notable examples, but for the most part, I really liked the people. And some of them were a little odd. Some of them were old hippies, and you had a good mixture of all backgrounds coming together. People who otherwise probably wouldn't seek each other out, and here was this bunch of people that just made it happen. And I'm telling you, we had some really good times when that bunch got together, and there'd be 40 people at Adelsheim's and kids running all over the place and 3 different languages being spoken. Oh boy, didn't get much better than that. Yeah.
So in our archive, we have a little book you wrote about Oregon wine, with a little pamphlet, I guess you might call it, of Oregon wine families.
Is that the only thing you have?
No, but that is one thing we have.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I was curious about the creation of that and what prompted it.
Oh, some guy approached me, asked me to write it for him, and I thought, well, I don't have anything else going on this week. That sounds like fun. And he had a really good photographer, and so yeah, that happened. Yeah, he was not the most. He was one of the 2%ers. Somebody shot him about 6 months after our project. He lived through it, but you can't make this stuff up. But I remember reading it in the paper, and I thought, well, that Blippity Blip, that's he had it coming. I mean, he just pushed somebody a little too hard, and yeah, I'd forgotten all about that. I was reading it at breakfast and laughing my head off. I mean, isn't that awful? It's just awful. But it struck me funny because he'd pushed me to, by the time we got through with that, I was ready to kill him. But it came out and it was fine. It was the best we could do at the time. Yeah.
Obviously, you had many friends in the industry and you had many relationships in the industry. I'm curious what their kind of reaction was to you. Obviously, you were pushing in some ways, and you were trying to break stories, and you were asking them questions maybe they didn't always want to answer. How did they handle you? How were you?
Sometimes they just put up with me. I think it was generally positive because overall I was doing for them what they couldn't do for themselves, right? And who else was going to do it? Matt Kramer wasn't going to do it. Yeah. I was kind of a necessary evil at times. And I know people got pissed off with me, and it just happens. Part of the deal. Part of the deal. People got pissed off with us when, their wines didn't get as high scores in the palate as they thought they should get. Maybe it was I don't know. Maybe they had a bad day. Maybe we had a bad day. You can't be completely 100% all the time, but we did the best we could. As honestly as we could. As double blind. I knew how it worked. And I finally decided that scoring wasn't the right way to go. It just was too arbitrary. But it's still done. Yeah.
So as Northwest Palate kind of grew and evolved, you mentioned kind of food and wine and not just Oregon, but Northwest and also Europe. Tell me about its role and your role with it. Were you out seeking stories? Were things coming into you? How did you kind of fill it from month to month?
Oh my God. Well, there were always interesting restaurants. I mean, there was a lot going on in Portland and Seattle as far as that goes, and there were, in conjunction with that, the wine lists. And I really believe that in both cities, the growth of the wine industry was a direct kick in the butt for restaurants to get better. When I moved to Portland, there was L'Auberge, Genoa, the Ringside, and the London Grill. And that was about it for reliably good food. And there were lots of littler restaurants. There were some wonderful little restaurants, but for fine dining, there really wasn't anything other than those four, and they were noteworthy. I mean, the London Grill, the old London Grill, I don't know how long you've been around, but that was an experience. And the old Ringside with all those old waiters, they were all 100 years old and they'd been doing it all their lives. And that was probably in some ways very European, very stuffy East Coast or something, I'm not sure, but yeah, now they're everywhere, and they're wonderful. I mean, it's like New York. You can go out and get a great meal for not much money, or you can spend $200 and get a great meal. It just depends on what you're looking for. That didn't exist, but it's always been. I think that good wine demands good food. You know, you're not just going to sit there and drink it and smack your lips. That gets boring. But when you put food with it, it's a synergistic thing. So it becomes more than greater than the sum. It's greater than the sum of its parts. Yeah. So
your writing career, I know, has continued since then. Tell me about the kind of the evolution of it from wine journalism. What happened next?
Well, what happened next? Well, I guess I'll just give it to you, and if you don't want it, that's fine. What happened next was I realized I was an alcoholic. Not because I'd planned that or in any way was okay with it. And I kind of denied it for probably 5 or 6 years, maybe 10. Hard to say with that disease because it's so sneaky. And I had to do something about it. I was self-destructing physically. Everything around me had gone to shit. So I checked into a treatment center out in Newburgh. Very good. And 2 weeks later, our son was killed in a car crash. And very few marriages survive the death of a child, and ours didn't. So I had to do something else. Meanwhile, I got this book contract to write Oregon Wine Country. So I wrote that sober. I wrote Washington Wine Country sober. And then I decided I can't do this anymore. You know, I'm not doing this because it's bad for my health. And so I moved to Portland and reinvented myself and started writing mystery novels, which is something I had wanted to do since I was a kid and knew there was such a thing as a mystery novel. So that's kind of where it all, this is how this all came around, and I kind of reunited with all my friends who lived in Portland I'd never lost touch with, and made a good life for myself. Yeah. But no, the wine writing had to end. I would have never ended it if I didn't have to, because it's the most fun I've ever had. And I mean, writing mystery novels is the most fun I've ever had too. So I can, you know, but I love my life now, and I'm not creating havoc, and I'm not dead. And that's, and my daughter and I are very close, and all the things I've ever really were important to me in life are still there. Except I wish I could have continued with the writing and the traveling, and it was just so good. Yeah.
So how did, tell me about the first novel for you, and how it came about, and what's different about writing fiction than writing nonfiction?
Well, the difference is in writing fiction, you can be God, you know. If you don't like what somebody says, you just go back and change it. And that's kind of like, oh my, I've been a journalist all my life, you know. I've tried to say exactly what people have said, you know, all these years. And and so people can behave outrageously, and often do. And I can make up stories, but I can use things too. I mean, the Emma Goldwyn mysteries, when they're set in wine country, and not all of them are. I've got one more coming that's going to be set in wine country, and one that's over in Eastern Oregon. But because Emma doesn't just stay in one place, and she's got this crazy friend Melody that is always getting her into something, and it's fun. I kind of got off track here. I can use. Oh, okay. All the stuff I learned about wines and wineries and dirt and people, I can use. I mean, everything in a novel is collective knowledge from somewhere else, right? I mean, it's not something you necessarily experience directly, but there's collective knowledge that's all stored up there that you don't even know you have. And so that's how it's different, I guess.
Tell me about the first one.
The first one was, okay, where did she go? And she comes back. She goes back, Emma goes back to kind of stick her toe, and in her case, she'd been away long, 7 or 8 years, which is it's not my story, but she kind of renewed old friendships out there and realized that, yeah, she could go back and hang out, and it would be, but she hadn't trusted herself, because Emma's an alcoholic, and she hadn't trusted herself really to go back out there and be able to handle it. And she found out she could, and she found out she still had the juice to write about it, and that it was still interesting to her. And then, oh my goodness, a murder happened, you know, and then another murder happened, and so I had a lot of fun with that. Yeah, and there were people that rubbed her the wrong way, and she wasn't like the author. She was pretty frank about letting those opinions be known. And sometimes the author is a little too candid, but anyway, that's another story. Yeah, that's kind of how it went. And then for some reason in the second one, Emma had a sister who disappeared, and they had to go looking for her. And that had little to do with wine country, but everybody who reads that book talks about the people out, the vineyard crews. It was in February, and they're out there pruning in their yellow slickers, and as they're leaving the area, Emma's noticing that. And I just want to, part of writing those novels is wanting people to know how beautiful it is, how beautiful it is, and all the things I appreciated about the industry and being out there and the seasons and, oh yeah. Wine country, there you're back to that agrarian thing again. It preserves the land, and it's still beautiful. You know, I mean, that could be another big subdivision. Actually, Ponzi's old place is. The last time, God, I hadn't been out there for a few years, and I drove out there. Oh my God. I think it was after I moved back to Portland, and I'm going, good grief. You know, they were out in the middle of nowhere, and there's that little place is surrounded. So we can't let that happen to our. We can't let that happen to our land. Now there's got to be some. There's got to be some stuff left where you can grow things where it isn't 1,000 miles away. It's important. This industry is important for all the changes, and I want people to know that. I still want people to know that.
When you had your first novel written, I'm curious. First of all, if it was cathartic for you in any way to finish a fictional piece, and second of all, what you did with it. What was the process for you after you had a written piece?
I don't know if you'd say cathartic. It was cathartic for Emma. I think it was cathartic for me, not so much the material. I mean, well, not so much the material, but the fact that I wrote a novel. It was like having another baby. It took a long time. It was arduous. And when it finally popped out, it was like, oh my God, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And truly, I thought it was. I self-published. I kind of nibbled around at getting an agent, but I was too impatient. And probably I could have gone, you know, at some point you have to quit writing. I probably could have gone over it another couple times and changed a few things. And I have since then and redone it in the ebook format. Not major redos, but just little things. And I thought it was pretty good. You know? I see mistakes. I see mistakes in all of them. Not typos, not the things that 7 readings and 3 spell checks and grammar checks and everything else, not the stuff that misses, but I see things that I wish I'd done differently. But I think that's the case with anything you write, you know? And I think there'd be something wrong with it if it was perfect, maybe. I don't know. It's a mysterious process. The part in fiction writing that's so fascinating is like a couple of the characters in my first novel, An Unholy Alliance. That old guy that owned the vineyard, Nestor Pullman or whatever his name was, yeah, he just came to me. She was out there messing around and ran into this guy, and they ended up having a conversation. And he was an old-time grape grower. He'd never had a winery. That was just the name, everything. It just sort of was, I was writing along, and there he was. That doesn't happen in journalism. And I love it when that happens. That's the magic. So yeah, there's a lot of magic there.
What is your writing process like for fiction, and how have you kind of honed it over the years?
I write when I can. I write when I feel like it. If something else comes up, I just became a grandmother in December. I haven't written anything worthwhile since 2 months before that. The pandemic didn't help either, but actually I got to get up in the morning and walk, and then I can write, and then sometimes if it's not working, I'll go do something else. And it's like I have a sweet spot about 7 o'clock at night. I have a sweet spot usually late morning. I try to work with the sweet spots. But if I'm really going on something, I can go all day and night. It just depends. It's really, you know, when the flow is there, you're not going to walk away from that. It's impossible to walk away from it.
So you mentioned you have something else coming up for yourself on the writing project. Tell me about what's next.
Well, I plan to do, in fact, I've written a few chapters on 2 Emma Goldwyn novels. And I'd like to do a prequel to the Emma Goldwyn novels, maybe when she lived out in wine country. That's something I've toyed with. Because that would be able to show a lot of what it was like. That, you know, she has these flashes of memory, but there isn't much detail about, to kind of set the stage for what it was like when there were 16 wineries instead of however many hundred there are now. I've lost track. How many hundred are there?
900 maybe?
I mean, that's freaky. How in the world did that happen? Nobody intended that. But you know, it's an addictive lifestyle, and I don't mean it in the alcohol sense, in the wine drinking sense. It is a very sweet lifestyle if you choose to do it as a lifestyle. I don't know how much of that is even happening now. You know, Bollinger, great, but they're not the Ponzi's. You know, I visited the winery. They do a great job. They're going to be a definite asset to this industry, but it's totally different. Yeah.
We've talked a couple times during the interview about changes you've seen in the industry, and that like that one. Are there other changes you've seen as the growth has happened, and from your perspective, what else is different about the Oregon wine industry now than in the past?
You know, I kind of distanced myself when I had family members still at Chehalem. I used to go out and cook harvest dinners every lunch, you know, lunch for the winery crew once a week during harvest, and that was just really special. I would guess that one would be hard pressed to find a really icky bottle of wine, of Oregon wine, you know, because people aren't making, I mean, stuff happens, and many wines are going to be better than others, but you know, the technology, the knowledge, the process, you don't have home winemakers coming in anymore and making wine. So a wine might not be very good, but it will most likely, I would expect a level of technical soundness to it. Where were we?
You're saying that the winemaking itself is hard?
Yeah, I expect, you know, people who started wineries back in our day can't afford to do that anymore. So you have to come in. What I see is a lot of money, and people obviously have it. And I am so glad our early wineries did well. You know, I'm really, really glad that Ponzi's getting bazillions of dollars for, and that they can, I mean, everybody who came up here was taking terrible chances. I mean, they were putting everything on the line for this thing, and people like us don't start wineries anymore. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when we bought out on Ribbon Ridge, it was $3,000 an acre. I don't know what that land is worth now. Scads. Yeah. Especially with mature vineyards on it. Yeah, but where can you, yeah, that's how it's changed. It's just overwhelming.
You mentioned Wynn, new mother. Congratulations on that.
Yes, indeed.
Tell me about watching her grow into the winemaking world.
Oh, she's such a great person. There's just nobody like her. Well, she kind of, the first Christmas card she was in, we were up there holding her on that bare land, and Ian was standing in front, and she was there in her little bonnet, and you know, she couldn't get away from it. And then when Harry started doing commercial wine, the kids would be down in the basement. They'd get paid for putting the labels on. And then later on, I know, well, she went to back east to a Ivy League school and got a degree in chemistry. So she was following in her dad's footsteps, kind of, sort of. But she wasn't sure. Okay. And then she worked, right out of school, she went up to Syracuse and got a job in a lab, a pharmaceutical lab. And then she came here, back here after 2 years. She couldn't stand being in those winters. And she came back here and did research at OHSU, and we were out having dinner one night, and I said, how long are you going to do this? And she said, I don't know. And I said, what do you think about getting into the wine industry? And she said, oh, I don't know. And I said, yeah, you get to drink good wine, you get to eat good food, you get to travel to places, you get to go do harvest in New Zealand. Well, she hadn't done that yet, but she'd worked harvest a couple times out at Chehalem, and said you get to go all these interesting places because people in the wine industry travel. And Harry was traveling a lot then, and she said, yeah. And I said, it's kind of a nice lifestyle. And she said, yeah. And then a year later, she enrolled at UC Davis, and then she worked harvests in California, and she worked 2 harvests in New Zealand, and she wanted to get her master's degree. She probably could have been a really good winemaker without it, but she didn't want to have to argue with her dad about certain things. And and she knew that she needed some clout, you know? And it worked really well. I mean, they've worked together for years, and it seems like an amazing partnership. They have great respect for each other. She's a crack winemaker. You know, Ian and I were more kind of off in the clouds, and Harry and Wynn are really grounded and focused, and she does everything she's supposed to do to produce good wine, and she knows how to do it. Plus, she's got a great palate, and great knowledge. I just have a lot of admiration for her, and I'm glad she picked that path because she seems well suited to it, and she seems to get a lot of joy in it. She has a lot of she's really close with a lot of people out in the in the business. I mean, this women's group, they're doing amazing things. These women winemakers, that they get together and have their little tastings and socials, and they're all going to be glad to be able to get back to that. It's been such a hard time lately, but yeah, she's doing amazing things, and she's got a lot of good people to do it with. And I'm so proud of her.
You mentioned the pandemic and its effect. Tell me about, from your perspective, obviously you're not in the wine industry, but from how it has affected you and your work life.
Well, it's been very difficult because, well, for the first 3 or 4 months, we were all scared to do anything. I mean, literally. And I have some people, close friends out here. One thing we never quit doing, we had to move, and we would get out every day, rain or shine, with our little masks on and do our walks. So I kept doing that. I got back into cooking because I had more time. It's been hard. And then one of my best friends got pancreatic cancer and died a couple months ago. So we had to, give her wide berth during chemo. We couldn't even go. I mean, if we went to her house, we were all sitting out on the deck, and she'd be sitting inside. She had no immunity, and that was a horrible thing to have happen. And then there was this I think it was such a blessing to have a grandkid arrive in the middle of it all. And on Harry's birthday, he is all puffed up like a toad about that. He is so pleased. And it's just this wonderful, mellow kid, and Wynn's already decided he's going to be in the wine industry. The third generation. And I think they're all committed to that, poor thing. But no, it's just been a lot of ups and downs, and the worst thing for me is it's been difficult for me to write, and I've had all this time, but I've had other things that were more important, and they've been getting my attention. So, so I mean, it's been a change of life for everyone, and I stuck about the only people. Well, really, the only people I'd see regularly were Wynn and Rob, and then Wynn and Rob and Julian. But yeah, that was kind of it. We had some dinners, masked gatherings in Harry's and Dee Dee's garage, for major events. But it's been pretty solitary, really. I mean, we're not of an age where we can go chasing around and think, oh, well, if I get it, I'll survive, because the odds are against it, even if you're healthy. I mean, you watch TV just like everyone else, and yeah, we couldn't take chances. And I think I'll still I think what I do now is I'm going to probably still wear masks when I go to the grocery store, even if I don't have to. I mean, there was no flu season this year. Who wants to get that? And I think the masks are a godsend, because that's what's, I think more than anything else, that's what's kept people from getting sick. Yeah, I'm a big believer. And I don't want to get sick. I don't want to get anyone else sick. Yeah, so but the world has changed. For me, at least.
You talked about your future writing plans. What else do you have? What else do you see, looking forward to in the future? Looking forward to getting back to it, and looking forward to tackling in the coming years?
I hope I find. I mean, I'm not going to forget how to write, but I hope I find the juice to write a couple more novels, because I've just been struggling with getting going on, really getting into it, I've written, like I said, but I haven't really gotten into either of the two other ones I've started. And Ian was an amazing poet, and I'm going to put together editing his poetry and getting a book out by Christmas at the latest. So yeah. Yeah, he was, he wrote amazing poetry. And even, I mean, he died when he was 19, and I can't even imagine where he might have gone with that. He would have been maybe another Amanda Gorman. I mean, you know, he just came to him. It's, yeah, when you get that voice, it's not something that happens to too many people. So.
What prompted you to do that now with his poetry?
Oh, I keep, you know, it was so long, I didn't want to even think about it. I just guess it took a long time to be ready to do it. Yeah. And it's still difficult, but I did get them all out on his birthday last June and read through the whole thing and think, oh my God. Look at this, you know, it stands up. It stands up to the test of time. And so, yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to, you know, it's something Harry and I will collaborate on. He's digitalized all the old photos. I think we could put out an amazing book, and there are family members who would appreciate it. And yeah.
So, last question for you, maybe a little philosophical for you here at the end.
Okay.
Tell me about, from your perspective, what is the role wine plays in a society?
Well, I think it's a great civilizing influence. It's hard to sit down and have a couple glasses of wine with someone and bear enmity. I mean, it does happen, but it softens edges. It's art and science. And I think it's an important part of culture. I think in conjunction with food, you know, it's just sitting down and sharing. It's one of the most civilized things we can do. Really. And people who, one thing we always did in our family was sit down and have dinner together every night, no matter what. And it was always a remark, no matter where we'd been in the day or who was mad at whoever else or whatever else was going on, we did that. And I think in our first world cultures are getting, I talk, you know, I mean, so-and-so eats dinner, and then so-and-so comes home and eats dinner, and then somebody else comes through and eats dinner. No, you got to do this, you know, and wine is an integral part of that. And just, I especially, I mean, I knew that just from how I was raised and how we as a family functioned, that it was where everybody, we got to hear the stories, and it's the story stupid. And it's tribal in the best sense of the word. And more people should do it, dang it. You know? Don't just pretend like dinner isn't important. You got to sit down with whoever you're with, have dinner. And I'm going to beat the drum on that till I'm dead. I think I've passed that on. I'm pretty sure I have. And it's just really one of the most important things we can do, and wine is an important part of that. And it has been for thousands of years. I mean, it's not somebody's new idea. It's past the test of time. People aren't going to quit doing it, but I hope. You know? It's really magical.
All the questions that I have for you today, Judy. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover here today?
Good grief, we covered just about everything, don't you think? We've been busy.
That was the goal, so excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, for your hospitality, for your sharing and candor.
I am glad that this happened. It's been a lot of fun for me.
Good, excellent. I'm so glad.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Let you off the hook.